Welcome to Sincerely Me, a podcast about self-discovery and inner work so you can cultivate a deeper relationship to yourself and show up more fully in your work and life. My name is Tallia and I'm honored to be your host. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I feel like it's been forever since I've been behind the mic, and it feels so good to be back. I've been away for a couple weeks traveling with family and was really able to take the time and space to slow down, to reflect, to do a lot of the things that we talk about here on the podcast for myself, and I'm feeling so energized about closing this year out and heading into 2020. I'm also going to be sharing a solo episode soon, since I haven't done a solo episode in quite some time, about the importance of reflecting back on the year before we jump into all the goals and the resolutions and the intentions and all the things we want to do next year. It's important to take that step back and look back at all the things you've done, who you've been, how you've been, what you've experienced, what you've learned in this past year. This year for me was full of lessons, easy and hard. So I'm thinking about maybe recording an episode about the lessons I've learned and then sharing some questions that can support you all in reflecting back on your year so that you head into 2020 not feeling like you're starting at ground zero, but instead feeling progress, feeling movement, feeling ready to continue the work instead of starting over. So today's conversation is, oh my goodness, an amazing one. It's with Meghan Telpner. She's the founder of the Academy of Culinary Nutrition. And you'll notice in the beginning that the conversation begins with Meghan sharing her health journey. She talks a lot about her challenges and the role of nutrition and diet and exercise and health and wellness. But it takes a beautiful turn into really being a conversation about releasing the things in life that no longer serve us. And that doesn't have to be related to health. It can be related to any and all things in life. So it does begin a little bit more focused on health and nutrition and diet, but then ends up becoming a bigger conversation about taking ownership over what we give our attention to, the importance of checking in with ourselves, being intentional about the choices we make, and again, releasing the things that no longer serve our highest good. Her mantra is to simplify instead of complicate. And I for one, I'll speak for myself, tend to overcomplicate many things and take many things way too seriously in life. So it was a great reminder to me, and I hope it serves as the same to you. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here is my lovely talk with Meghan Telpner. Well, hi, Meghan. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I know a little bit about the work you do, and I'm really excited to dig into really how you stepped into this role as both the founder and director of the Academy of Culinary Nutrition, but more importantly, and most importantly, how you've come to call yourself the Chief of Awesome, because I love that and I really want to know what led to that.
What led to it was really having my own business and being like, surviving the corporate world where titles and promotions and all that is so important that I'm like, I can call myself whatever I want. And my staff does too. Like everyone gets to pick their own title. And, what's interesting about it is when I email people from my own email address, like that is the signature on the bottom of my email. And I'd say like 90% of the time someone responds back me like, I need a fun title. And it's like a nice way to engage too.
I love that. That's so awesome. I especially love it because I do talk a lot about identity in my coaching work and how we tend to define ourselves by these titles and roles that actually mean nothing at the end of the day. So to give yourself the freedom to just decide what the heck you want to call yourself and to figure out that the Chief of Awesome feels best. I love that. I love that so much.
Some days I'm struggling to maintain it, but it's something to strive for.
Yes, absolutely. So when we connected initially, there was this kind of overlap in the work we do in terms of helping people take a more honest approach to living life more wholly. H, not HOLY, but WHOLLY. So in a more whole and like wholesome way. And I know your background is in nutrition and health, and would love to know how that fits into this picture. But I'd love to start with kind of your journey into the space that you're in now, where you were in some ways forced to evaluate how you were showing up in life and what approach you were taking to life, and really came to a point where you had to kind of slow down and do some healing work on your own and for yourself. So let's start with the beginning of that story and let that take us wherever it needs to go.
Sure thing. I think my story, it seemed like I was the only person in the world at the time going through this, but now, 15, 16 years out, I'm like, oh my goodness, so many young women deal with this, which was that sort of at my quarter life mark, like 25, 26, I was dealing with some serious health issues that were ongoing, continuously being undiagnosed for 3 years. So the first of the symptoms showed up around 2003. Took 3 years until in 2006, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune inflammatory bowel disease. And at the time, I'd been jumping from job to job. I think I had like 9 jobs in 3 years because I love job interviews. And was searching for something to bring me some level of fulfillment. And the result was that nothing was, and my body basically imploded on itself. And it was at that moment that I realized I was doing things that weren't necessarily for me. I got a job and I was working really hard to get promotions and get raises. And then I'd go get a job at a new company because they were offering more money. And I was sort of following this path or this trajectory that I think a lot of us in our 20s think we're supposed to be on and think we're supposed to be following. And the result for me was that it made me sick with a disease that I was told I would have for life. And so I was 26 at the time, and that was like a massive, terrifying wake up call because I was like, I'm just getting started. Like, I don't want to deal with this. And that was what forced me, because I'd been going to doctors for 3 years, couldn't get a solution, couldn't get even a cause or what it was. And that's what forced me to really dig in and begin the healing journey, which started really, and I say on a superficial level, meaning that it started with me just looking at my diet, which is very important, but that's not going to heal your whole life. But I started
Mhm.
looking at the basics of nutrition, and my undergraduate degree was in fashion. So I had no knowledge of science and physiology and biology, and definitely not medicine or healing or diseases. But I felt like it was common sense that a disease of the digestive tract would be affected by what passed through the digestive tract. And so that's why I started with my diet. And I looked at foods that could potentially exacerbate inflammation, and they're still the same foods I avoid today: gluten, dairy, sugar, alcohol, coffee, and looked at foods that potentially would heal or soothe the digestive tract. And what I ended up with was a list of processed foods on the no list and whole, unprocessed, or from scratch ingredients on the yes list. And so that was sort of my first step towards finding a solution to what was going on in my life. And then I realized that, I didn't realize I was so depleted I couldn't work out at the gym anymore. I'd been working at the gym with a trainer and like really intensely. And so I gave that up because I just didn't have the physical strength. And I started going to a yoga studio. And through the yoga studio, I met a meditation teacher. So suddenly I was the person who cooked 100% from scratch, did yoga and meditated twice a day. And I was going for acupuncture and drinking these Chinese medicinal teas. And I was basically open to whatever could potentially help. And the result was that after a month, I was physically symptom free from this disease that I was told I would have for life. And after 3 months on this sort of self prescribed regimen, and prior to this, I'd had to take a leave from work because I physically couldn't get on public transit. I couldn't be somewhere without a bathroom because of the symptoms of what I was dealing with. So I spent this 3 months healing. And after this 3 month period, it wasn't just that I was physically better, but my the entire expression of my genes had changed. I no longer had any signs or symptoms of this disease that they still say has no cure. And I felt happy. Like at my core, I felt like just content and joyful and happy. And there were certain things that fell away from my life in this process. I stopped watching television. I stopped reading like those celebrity crappy magazines. I took a vow of non gossiping. Like I just got rid of all this negativity and negative energy and negative emotion. And the result was astounding for me, and it was basically the way I've described it, and the way I described it in my book was learning how to exhale for the first time in my entire life, and
Mm.
now functioning on just a different frequency. And after that experience, and I didn't understand what had happened. At the time, I didn't understand the mechanisms. I didn't understand what meditation does to us physiologically. I didn't understand what a spiritual connection was, and not in a religious sense, but just being in touch with your truest version of yourself and your ability in the universe to create positive change. And all these things was just so foreign to me. And so it was after my own experience was when I formalized my education. I went back and I studied nutrition and effectively, and that was in 2006, 2007. So now 12 years later, the practice continues, and I'm continually learning and evolving my diet and evolving my personal practices and my stress processing practices, and continuing on the path.
Wow, what a story. Okay, I'm like writing notes like a mad woman on this side of things because there's so much that I feel like we can talk about from that story. And one of the main things that I'm really hearing from you is that the journey really for you was learning how to heal from within. But a part of that was recognizing that what led to most of the healing, yes, you changed your diet, yes, you changed lifestyle, but there was an element of being a lot more conscious and intentional when it came to what you were choosing to give your attention to, whether again from like a food level or what you were consuming content wise. And I think that this idea of attention is so central to so many of the conversations I have because it really affect what you pay attention to, what you give your energy to really does affect how you feel, how you think, your physical makeup, your emotional makeup, your mental makeup. And it really calls for a shift at some point to recognize like all this external stuff, the things you're told you should do, the kind of fate of an illness, right? Like if you can turn inward and really ask yourself, well, what is the truth of this for me? And how can I start to ask myself what I really need and listen to my body? That's really where you start to get in the driver's seat of your own life and feel that sense of ownership to make the changes you need to make versus again kind of just like accepting things for what they are and just settling for what is without thinking that it could be any different or any better.
Yeah, absolutely. And recognizing that it is and has to be like a multi-faceted or multi-prong approach, that you can't just change your diet and continue eating, your quinoa and your kale salads, but be miserable. And you can't fully sort of awaken to a new way of operating if you're still fueling the cells of your body with toxic garbage.
Yeah. And I love that you said that it's a new way of operating. And I think a lot of us tend to focus a lot more of our attention on things to do, what's next on the list, what's my next goal, what's my next milestone, whether as an entrepreneur or in your career. But to your point, at some point in life, it's less about focusing on the doing and more about how you're operating, how you're being, how you're showing up, what approach you're taking to life. And I love that you've been able to find that journey for yourself. And I think for most of us, what I've noticed in the conversations I've had is that it kind of takes a wake up call from the universe, like whether it's a sickness or an accident or, a loss of a loved one, like there tends to be this moment of shaking, like
Yeah.
things are shaken up.
I think what it
And
is I think there are actually very early signs when you're on the wrong path, but they're like whispers, and then the universe just gets
would
louder
totally.
and louder and louder
Yeah.
till you're literally, like, on your knees, and you have no other choice.
Yeah.
Why we can't
Yeah.
listen to
Did
those
you
whispers, I don't know, but
Well, I think because like, I think a lot of it's just conditioning and societal pressures and expectations, and they're validated by the way everybody else is living, and I think fear, of course, gets in the way, and I think for a lot of people who realize there's another way but maybe ignore the whispers,
yeah.
it's this the kind of like the isolation that comes with that, or like, man, like, am I that different than everybody else, and the loneliness that might be attached to that. I think in many ways we tell ourselves it's easier to just stick to the plan, stick to what stick to what you should do.
Yeah, and
um
I think too, we're
but
also programmed to expect, like, we want to take aggressive action all the time and expect an aggressive, very clear result. Like, if I do this, then this is going to happen straight away. And it's
mhm.
usually needs to be significantly more subtle through our action, and the result will be more subtle as well. But it's that cumulative positive action that creates the results we're seeking.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's and the patience that
Yeah.
we have to cultivate
Yeah.
along the way.
That's my ongoing practice is like, "I want it now,"
Yes.
and the universe is like, "No, no, you're gonna wait a little bit."
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, what were some of the signs, the whispers for you looking back? Can you pinpoint when the universe was like, Megan, like, there, maybe don't keep going, but okay, we see you not listening, so we'll let you keep going for another few months. Like, what were those flags for you, if there were any along the way?
No one has ever asked me that, but, now looking back, it's so obvious, and I think it started
Yeah.
when I was really young, like in school, in high school. Like, I always excelled in school, but I hated it, and I barely went. I would be like, "This is a waste of my time." I would just do my work at home. I just didn't wanna be there. And then when I was going to university, I ended up taking a year off and was just sort of having sort of the first of a health crisis. This was more mental, emotionally triggered. That I didn't want to do that either. And then every year in university, I'm like, I don't want to be doing this. And then when I had to get a job, I'm like, God, this is killing my day. And it was just this feeling that there was something else I was supposed to be doing, but I didn't know what it
Mhm.
was. And I was a kid. And I was just sort of, being guided by my parents who are very creative, but also, um, in many ways, like, very traditional in their roles and in their expectations. And so it it I think that was sort of it. And then having so many different jobs and thinking that if I just get paid more, and I was getting paid a ridiculous amount of money for how old I was and the experience I had. Um, but I just kept going to these interviews and talking my way into bigger and better jobs, thinking that was what the solution was. That, we all want to make lots of money. So if I have lots of money, then everything will be fine. And that didn't solve the problem either. So that was sort of it. And through this process, I just got sicker and sicker, until, yeah, I was not completely down and couldn't work anymore, and realized that, and I didn't even have a plan when I went back to nutrition school that I was going to work in the field necessarily. I just wanted to learn what I had done that I'd been told was impossible. But pretty early on in my formal studies, I was like, well, I can't go back to the environment that made me sick. And this is where a lot of fear, becomes the biggest barrier to people, thinking that, okay, I'm feeling better now. I can just go back to how I was living before because that's comfortable, or at least I know it. And the reality is that when you're in this healing process, you're establishing new habits and patterns that you have to maintain in order to
Mhm.
continue experiencing the benefits of your efforts. As soon as you lapse back, you're back in the same position. I saw this little, like, meme come up on Instagram that said your ex-boyfriend comes into your life to remind you if you're still stupid or not. And it's sort of that thing, like, "Oh, yeah, nope, you like go out and party and drink all night and you're like, nope, that still doesn't work for me. It's like you need to sort of
Yeah.
slip back a few times. I dated someone while I was in nutrition school that I had dated like in my what I call my first life. And I was dating him there, and it was sort of like, yeah, no, this is still not the right type of person for me. This is still not going to work. And you sometimes just need those reminders to keep moving forward. And so when I look back, I'm like, yeah, there was a lot of signs. I just didn't know what they meant or what I was supposed to do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, and I'll speak for myself here, it feels safer to ignore the signs because I think there's a lot of fear around, okay, if I listen to the signs, what does that mean in terms of all the changes I'm going to have to make? What does that mean for everything that I've built up until this point? And what does that mean for the relationships I've built in my life? What does that mean? What does that mean? Like, and I think we assume that um, for whatever reason, it'll make things worse. Like our minds go to worst case scenario versus asking ourselves, well, how will this contribute to my growth? How will this contribute to my healing? How could this maybe make my relationships and my path and my whatever else better? But I think there's an attachment from, the ego based side of ourselves to what we've built and what we've accomplished and who we associate with, what we associate with. And the stories that we live in, that to recognize that maybe we've been in some way like living in a lie, who wants to admit that when that's the way you think about it,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And there's another element here too, from what I heard you say, that I'm also experiencing for myself, is that we tend to live very much in our heads. And it wasn't until actually last week, I sat down across from someone who I'm doing some healing work with, and he said, "How does your body feel?" And for that one moment, I like got out of my own head and actually felt myself in my body. And I looked at him and I said, "Wow, I'm in a lot of pain. Like physically, I'm holding on to a lot of tension, but I don't even recognize it because I'm so in my head." So getting into that practice of really feeling into your body and like asking your body how it feels, I think is such an important way to also take that pulse, get the pulse, like what's the temperature check on how I'm actually doing, not just mentally or emotionally, but also physically in my body. Because I think, to your point, our bodies have so much intelligence and they know before our minds do what's really going on and where we're holding on to things. So learning how to really feel into your body, I think, is such an important element of all of this. And then the other thing you mentioned reminded me of just the importance of really checking in with yourself and being intentional in the choices you make, like whether it's once a week, once a month, looking at all the things you're spending time doing and the choices you've made, and really asking yourself why. Like, why is this what I'm doing? Why is this the choice I'm making? Why is this the thing I've said yes to? I think if we got into the practice of that more habitually, we would be able to maybe notice those whispers along the way and answer to the call before we were forced to, and things came to a point where they were maybe irreversible or just harder to tackle than they would have been otherwise.
Yeah, and that's a really big one too. And I think that's where a lot of us come down with that case of excusitis. So which is what I call like the inflammatory condition of making excuses.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that, and it's just so common where you buy a big house in the suburbs and you have a really big mortgage, and then you have a really big house to fill with a lot of stuff. And then you have to commute for an hour and a half to your job that you don't enjoy to pay for all these things. And you're suddenly living a life that is not serving any aspect of your being, and yet are afraid to admit that maybe this wasn't the right thing. And that there's so much value in things being good enough or making do with what you have, and really having an intention to simplify at every option you have to make a decision. And this is something my
Mm-hmm.
husband and I take extremely seriously, maybe too extreme. But we've cultivated and curated a very particular and specific way of living that is intended. We have a little jingle we sing that's like simplify, don't complicate. I'm not going to sing it, but that's become our mantra. I can't sing.
Come on,
No,
come
no, no.
on.
But
For the people, Meghan.
simplify, don't complicate. You don't need so much on your plate. So,
I love it.
so it's this idea that you can live very simply and
Yeah.
extremely happily. And one of the
Yes.
challenges I set for myself on this regard, because I wanted to be able to make decisions for my life and for my business, not out of um, a pressure to keep up with other people or other people's expectations, or out of financial need or stress. So I stopped
Mm-hmm.
shopping 7 months ago, for myself. My son's growing really quickly, so I have to get him clothes. But I bought a jumpsuit. So it's this green jumpsuit. My mom thinks I look like I could be like a car mechanic. I'm like, whatever, I'll be the most stylish car mechanic. But I'm
Yes.
wearing this jumpsuit every single day through the winter, at least to work, because I have an office, but no one is here. And it's like I've just eliminated a decision every day, and it wasn't, getting dressed didn't bring me a huge amount of joy. I still get dressed if I have to go out, but it's just the idea that like there's different options at every turn, and you don't have to stop
Yep.
shopping for sure, but you also don't always need as much as you think you need, or you don't need as much money as you think you need to make, and you don't need as big a house as you think you need, because what happens is we keep consuming all this stuff, and it just takes us further and further away from our potential. And what I've come to realize just in the last year, because I spent a lot of time thinking about this, is that I've cultivated the life of my dreams and I get to live it. And we all have that option. And that doesn't mean that like annoying stuff isn't going to happen. And like I have to go renew my driver's license. And like there's still those things that you're always going to have to do, whether
Right.
are paycheck to paycheck or have $5 million. But this idea that you actually can live the life of your dreams, and it's about making the really clear objectives about what brings you that joy and fulfillment, and then making the decisions every day that support that objective.
Yeah.
And it can be, and it's a shift that happens in your mind. And you talked about tuning into your body, and when you tune into both of those things, you realize like, wait a second, maybe I have exactly what I need in this moment and I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. I think to your point, we tend to think of success as looking a certain way, or my dream life, my dream this, like our minds go straight to all the things we don't yet have, whether it's the money or the things. In any case, it ends up being like these external, mostly material things. And I think if we really took the time to ask ourselves the tougher questions of, well, what does it look like? What does the dream life look like for you, and why? And I think it might take a couple iterations. I think for some of us, and I'll again speak for myself here, like if I sat down to write that initial story out of what my dream life looks like, it's probably not quite where it would end up if I let myself write out about 3 or 4 different versions, because I think with each version I would actually get to more of the truth of what felt right for me. But it takes some unlearning, and it takes some questioning, and it takes some challenging to really figure out what it looks like and why, and what you're hoping will come of the decisions if you decide to choose differently, and just what you're letting go by choosing differently, what you're allowing for by choosing differently. But yeah, I mean, I think it's we don't give ourselves the time and space to really ask ourselves that question. And I hope this podcast gives anyone listening, a little bit of a kick in the butt to really sit down with yourself and ask yourself, what is not the dream, but your dream, and why? What does it look like? And where are you in terms of taking action towards it? And I think, again, Meghan, to your point, when we dream up these lives, there are these things that are so far away in the future, and we go to all that we don't yet have. But I think to recognize in the moment, how are you living in the dream? How are you living in your dream now? And how can you come back to recognizing that you have all you need? And sure, the additions to the things and this and that won't hurt, but that a high quality life, a happy life, a joyful life doesn't rest upon getting these things that you don't have in the present moment.
Yeah, and I think we get stuck in this, and I write about this in my first book, the idea of creating to be happy. So we're doing something now, thinking it's going to bring us to a place of happiness in the future, rather than happily creating, which is doing things you love today. And with the former, the challenge is that you can do everything you want to today for a dream you have in the future. So you want to, achieve a specific thing or have a certain thing or have a certain house or a car or whatever. And so you're working really, really hard right now to get that thing. Or maybe it's working really hard on a relationship that's struggling because you want it to work in the future. And and it all might be very absolutely worthwhile and worth that time and energy. But the reality is that often the things that were causing us stress and were our top concerns and priorities, say 5 years ago, would become or would feel irrelevant to us today. And so we create all this misery in our life to try and make a future version of ourselves happy. And the reality is that we're not going to be the same person in 5 years or have the same wants and desires and needs. And so it's never worth the current misery to make a version of ourselves 5 years down the road that doesn't yet exist happy, because we don't know who that person's going to be.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Wait, can you say that again? Because I think the more people hear it, the more it'll actually resonate. So I'd love for you to repeat that.
Yes, I'll try another way. The idea that so we create these scenarios in our life today that make us miserable, thinking that, well, if I can just get through this, a future version of myself will reap the benefit and I will be happy in 5 years. So you can work at a horrible job with an abusive boss that you're not fulfilled at, but well, that's okay because in 5 years I'll be able to put that down payment on that condo, let's say. But then what happens between now and that 5 years, we have no control over. We don't know who that person is going to be in 5 years. That person probably doesn't want a condo. Maybe they want to go travel for a year and do that instead. Or so this idea that
Mm.
we can suffer today for future happiness is broken. It's a broken operating system, because 5 years down the road,
Yeah.
we are different people. 10 years down the road, we're different people. So if you think about 5 years ago, it's 2019, think 2014. Like, what was if you can remember or if you journal, like, look back at what your biggest worries or goals or concerns were. And are those relevant to you today? If that had been working back then, would you be happier now? And most times it's not going to be the case.
Yeah. Wow. That's super powerful. It reminds me of one of the questions that I ask a lot of my coaching work. And it's in I have this like favorite top 10 questions for reflection and journaling. And one of the questions is, what do you know to be true right now? And I think that's such a powerful question to ask, and reminds me so much of what you just shared, because I think, again, we make decisions based off of some uncertain future state that we can safely assume won't be the present once we're there, if that makes sense. And so how can we come back to the facts and work with what we know now and release some of this, I don't know if it's pressure, expectation, or just desire to control what we can't. Well, it's like we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And not to say that goals are bad or that it's not good to plan for the future, but there's a delicate balance between working with what you know now and becoming more of the person you want to be as you continue to grow and evolve through the experiences life throws at you.
Yeah, the thing is though, and like, yes, to all of that. And doing the work is challenging, but it shouldn't be ongoing days of misery.
Yeah.
And that's sort of it's a fine line, like going through the work and addressing your stuff and being present with it and sitting with it and feeling how it makes you feel. That's really important. It's very uncomfortable and very few people love it. They don't love doing it. That's part of the work. But on a big scale picture, like a big, what your week looks like, how you feel when you wake up in the morning, it shouldn't be with dread at what is going on in your life that day.
Yeah. And so many of us live in these stories that life has to be hard, work has to suck, money is hard to make, but I'll do it for, again, the promise of a better future that to what we're saying, you can't predict. So what are
No,
you doing?
no, especially now. Too much
Yeah.
is changing too fast.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more um, about the work you're doing today and how it connects to the conversation we've been having so far in terms of, shifting the approach you take to life in the context of nutrition and the book you've written and the podcast you now host. I would love to share more of that with anyone who's listening.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the conversation we're having today is that I started my business. I started working for myself as a nutritionist 12 years ago in the very same space I'm in today. And it was just me alone, writing blog posts, creating course material, trying to figure out how to get this thing going that I wanted to create. And it's now been 12 years. And effective this month, I'm actually back in the kitchen all by myself, basically doing that exact thing. And in the last 10 years, I built a really successful business, and I had staff members that were here, and I have employees now, and I have a whole team. They're just all happen to now be remote, because I was working towards this vision of how I wanted to be able to work. And so today I'm writing blog posts, I'm creating a course. It's in a different context now because it's for my school, the Academy of Culinary Nutrition. So the evolution of my work is basically an example of what we've been talking about, because it started out with a certain idea of what I wanted to create and do. And I was teaching cooking classes here in Toronto, and the demand grew beyond what I could accommodate in my little loft here. And then I took it online, and then it has just continued to grow and expand. So my primary job, aside from being chief of awesome, is running the Academy of Culinary Nutrition, which is an online cooking school. We offer a 14-week certification program teaching other people how to teach and lead these types of workshops and classes in their own communities. And so we now have over 2,000 graduates in over 60 countries. We have three to 400 certified instructors teaching the very same classes I used to teach here in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really at the core of what I do and the work I do. It's at the root of it. It's how do I empower other people to become the leaders and be able to execute change in their own lives and inclusively inspire others to do the same, so that we are all living and fulfilling on our greatest potential. And though diet is not going to solve all of anyone's problems or all of the world's problems, it is at the core of who we are, because what we eat becomes us. And so if we can target it and address it from a nutritional standpoint, it's an
Mm-hmm.
amazing way in. And once you start eating and living healthfully and asking these big questions about our food, then those questions start to extend outwards to, wait, what's my couch made of? How many pounds of flame retardants are in this? Or what's my deodorant made of? And is this going to be a problem? Or my mascara? Or, I'm ordering this thing online, but there's so much packaging involved. Like, is that really a wise decision? Do I really need that? And so it becomes like this cascade of questions that
Mm-hmm.
creates transformation for people. And so my approach has been to do it through inclusive nutrition, meaning that I don't preach any specific dietary philosophy. That's not for me to decide for a bunch of people I've never met or even laid eyes on, but it's about helping people develop food philosophies and values that really resonate with who they are, how old they are, where they live in the world. They're just, personal lifestyles. And so I teach on all of that. And that's what my books are about. And then our podcast was a summer series. My husband and I did Today's the Day podcast, where we answered basically the most common questions we are asked, like how do you raise an adventurous eater? How do you get your kids to try new foods? Is gluten-free diet a fad? Can you cure an autoimmune disease? So we did it as a summer series as a test. We want to keep it going, but just our schedules this month have not permitted us to get onto season 2 yet, but it will continue. And for both of us, my husband and I actually met in nutrition school, and he's a functional medicine practitioner. And so for both of us, educating is at the core of what we do. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be anybody's guru or, well, I have to know what Megan's going to say about it. My objective is to really teach people to tune in and know for themselves what they need to do. And so I am to provide those skills.
Yes, I love that. It's, to your point, not prescriptive, but it's teaching people how to trust themselves and define what their approach to life looks like in a way that actually feels good to them, and that I would assume they'd then take more ownership over because it came from them, not from someone else telling them what to do or how to live their life. And I think why I love so much of what you said in terms of the approach you take to your work, there's this element of, like, once you start paying more attention to what you're putting into your body, you also start paying attention to other choices you're making in life, the things you're buying, right? So there's this element of like conscious consumerism, just living more consciously and paying attention to things that actually matter to you, not just to the things that you feel like you should be giving yourself to. So I love that you've found a way to express these teachings and lessons in a way that is so much more holistic, and again, taking us back to kind of where we started, this idea of taking an approach to life that's more whole, and that's not just about what you put into your body, but about how and what you prioritize and what you value and how you make choices for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're like,
Perfect
yes.
summary. Yes. Let's do that, everybody.
Yes, 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 yes. Amazing. Well, I would also love to ask you. So, one question I ask everyone who's on the podcast is what it means to you to live a life of significance. So, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that the influence we have on others is infinite and unfathomable. And so to live a life of significance to me is really about being conscious about my influence, and we all have it. And so if we can go out in the world with the intention of being a positive influence on anyone we encounter, directly or indirectly, that has far-reaching significance and creates a domino effect of positive change.
Yes, so being conscious of the way you're showing up and knowing whether or not it's intended that there's going to be an impact on the people around you.
Yeah. And I, having been doing this for a long time now, it's so for me, and I don't go out much. I have a small child and I work a lot. But when I go out and I meet people who said, like, oh, I came to a cooking class of yours in 2009, and you know, you none of us know the impact we have. And so when I go out and people tell me, like, you changed the way I eat, or you've helped my daughter, or you improved this part of my life, like, that for me is the most rewarding thing, and that's what fuels me to keep working really hard for another 10 or 20 years. And I,
Yeah.
I think we all have that influence, whether it's a conversation you have with like another parent at the playground at pickup, or a conversation you have when you're dropping your mail off at the post office. Like, we have no concept of how we impact the lives around us. And if we become aware that we are impacting the life around us, it changes how we are when we leave the house, or when we wake up in the morning with people in our house, most importantly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that you said that. I think it's such a good reminder to recognize that the opportunity always presents itself to show up and to have an impact. Like, if you weren't conscious about it 5 minutes ago, like, here's another moment. There will be another, like, it life is just a series of moments, and the opportunity is always there for you to step into that recognition and realize how much power you really do have to make an impact, however big or small. And it's never too late to start, right?
Absolutely. Exactly.
To use your words, today's the day.
Yes. Today is always the day.
Today is always the day. I love it. Okay. And then my last question for you before I let you go is, in the spirit of the podcast, it's obviously, as you know, titled Sincerely Me, which is all about cultivating your relationship to yourself and really getting to know yourself through different exercises, reflections, what have you. And so one of the questions I also ask everyone is, if you were to write a letter to yourself, dear Megan, what would you want to say to yourself? And at what point in time would it be? Present, past, or future?
So I write a letter to myself, to like a future version of myself.
It could be future version, it could be past version, and which, regardless of where you choose to go time-wise, it's about the relationship you have to yourself, and what's something you would want to tell yourself right now?
I think whether I was sending it from 20-year-old me to almost 40-year-old me, which is what's happening this month, or or 40-year-old to 60-year-old me, I think the message that I do tell myself frequently, but it's all part of the process and it's all worth it. Signed, sincerely me.
Yay! I never tell people how to sign off, but if you're tuned in enough, you know that that's how I would love for you to sign off. Amazing. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Meghan. I would love for you to let people know how they can find out more about you, social handles, whatever it is that you want them to know so they can keep up with the great work you're doing.
Absolutely. So my personal website is meghantelpner.com, and I write a weekly blog where I stir the pot a little bit on various topics. And I'm at Meghan Telpner on Instagram, and my school is at culinarynutrition.com, and we offer a free little mini training. You make the most amazing gluten-free, dairy-free, nut-free, school-safe, allergen-friendly chocolate chip cupcakes. And that's at culinarynutrition.com/free training.
Wonderful. Well, I will have all of that linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing about your story. And I have no doubt that there are definite takeaways for those listening when it comes to shifting and, to your point, stirring the pot and really figuring out what is true for you in the way you live your life and how to make more conscious choices both internally and externally. So thank you so much, Meghan.
Thank you. And thank you for the amazing work you're doing in helping people through these sort of sticky and challenging transitions, and the interviews you do. And it's all just, I'm grateful that you are here and doing the work that you do. So thank you.
All right, everyone. That was my conversation with Meghan. I hope you enjoyed it. I know for me, I've listened to this episode about 3 or 4 times already and have continued to take so many notes because there are just so many great reminders in this conversation. And, over the past few months, as I've recorded and shared these conversations and these episodes on this podcast, it's not about sharing groundbreaking, revolutionary, new information. It's about having conversations that help you remember the things that you know deep down, that help you create the time and space to slow down, to remember. That's all it is. These ideas aren't new. We just forget. We get so caught up in, as you've heard me say, the speed of life, the speed of things, all the things we need to do. And it just adds layers of heaviness. It adds layers that cloud our judgment, that overcomplicate things. So again, it's about remembering, reminding ourselves, peeling back those layers, lightening our load, and releasing the things that no longer serve us. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you are here listening for the first time, I would love to meet you, to say hello. Give us a follow on Instagram at Sincerely Me Podcast. And my account privately is at Tallia Deljoux. Both of those two are linked in the show notes. And I don't know how I've waited until the end of this episode to share the most exciting bit of news, which is that applications, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm finally saying this. I've been waiting so long. Applications for the Inner Work Circle are officially open again. As you all may or may not know, the Inner Work Circle is that year-long program that I run in my business as a coach to support women in creating the time and space to slow down and to cultivate a deeper relationship to themselves through deep inner work practices and self-development. So check that out. In the show notes, applications, like I just said, are officially open on the website. If you were on the wait list, you will have heard from me in your inbox. So check your email. And next week, I'll be talking a lot more in detail about the program itself. So be sure to tune in if you are curious. Otherwise, go ahead and give it a look. It may just be the thing that your heart is needing most as you move into 2020. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll catch you on next week's episode. Sincerely, me.